Karam is a doctoral student at Yale University, where he is researching understory plants within forest farm settings. He also is serving as director of the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition, which brings together forest farming research, education, and community within the northeastern US. Today, he's going to share his experiences of building this network of researchers, producers, and businesses together to further forest farming within the Northeast. So he'll also discuss how this particular group and how the opportunities are for us to build a more decentralized organization connection of different propagation stock. So please join me in welcoming Haram to our virtual stage today.
Great. Like I said, my name's Karam Sheban. I'm going to be talking primarily today about my experience over the last 3 years of building the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition. There's a project that I'm the director of, and we're about 3 years into. So, because you all are at a forest farming conference with lots of different sessions, I'll move a little in. We've had some technical difficulties. I'll move through some of the material I had a little quicker, but we're going to talk about forest farming, who's doing it, our work with the NFFC in the Northeast US, and then touch briefly on the future of forest farming in the Northeast and some issues that kind of radiate and affect the entire country. So, forest farming, at its most basic, is using the shade of a forest canopy to create a conducive growing environment for crops that you're interested in growing. And it gets defined in lots of different ways, but at its most simple, that's what we're talking about. And the crops, right, the focal species of forest farming systems fall into this category of non-timber forest products, which is pretty self-explanatory. Anything that comes out of a forest, the commercial or use value, that's not timber. These are things like medicinal plants, edible plants, syrups, tree syrups, different ornamental things. Some people say that even animals count as non-timber forest products, but when we're thinking about forest farming systems, these are the species that we're talking about. And in particular, in the eastern forests of the United States, it's a diverse set of different crop opportunities that we're talking about. Black walnuts. We're talking about all kinds of, this last slide. There's 50 different medicinal herbs that are native to the region that are common to the marketplace. And what's really cool about forest farming systems is that not only are they very diverse, but they can also be very intensive in the sense that you can sort of stack your crops vertically. And so some of these species, such as black walnut here, are overstory species. So you've got a crop up in the canopy, all the way down to ramps in the understory, syrup lines running through the mid-story. And so sometimes you'll hear these referred to as multi-strata cropping systems. And that's kind of referring to the vertical strata of the forest system. So really dynamic systems. The herb species that I'll primarily be focused on today, and these are often the primary focus of forest farming systems. These are things like ramps, black cohosh, golden seal, American ginseng, bloodroot, Solomon seal. So a diversity of different understory species that have primarily medicinal and some edible markets. And I'm going to go through these really quickly, as I just mentioned these species, but each of these species are perennial, long-lived understory plants that you often hear are slow to grow and slow to develop. It's a relative statement. It's sort of like slow depending on if you're comparing it to, say, like a corn crop, but compared to a timber crop, a 7-year cropping cycle, 5-year cropping cycle is actually pretty quick. So forest farming systems are one of 5 types of agroforestry that are officially recognized by the USDA: alley cropping, riparian, forest buffers, silvopasture, windbreaks. Forest farming is the fifth. It's a little bit unique too, in that it's the one of out of those 5 practices, it's the practice that actually starts in a closed canopy forest. Some of the others can happen in forests, but primarily happen in fields. So So something I want to point out too is that within, we're talking about forest farming systems, but herbs can be produced in a wide range of different types of production systems. There's wild stewarding. That's just working with existing plant populations that you already have. It's very common for someone, say, to have a large ramp patch that they're stewarding. So all forest farming doesn't have to begin with planting seeds necessarily. There's a growing recognition of the role the wild stewarding plays. Wild simulated production. This is where you have the forest environment, but you actually go ahead and you introduce the understory crop. You broadcast your seed, you transplant some roots into your site. So you'll hear that referred to as wild simulated. Other than that, though, you basically leave that site untouched. Woods grown production. This is a more intensive form of forest farming where you can see this is essentially a understory chock full of American ginseng, and you would never find that plant growing at that density. And so this grower has actually gone in and tilled up the understory. They've added fungicide and fertilizer and different amendments. And so you're modifying the environment significantly more. You're getting higher yields. And so there's trade-offs there, but it is still happening in a forest. And then these plants are cultivated in these field kind of settings. And this is, again, this is ginseng under shade cloth. And this is like if you were to, buy a Monster Energy drink and it has ginseng in it, like this is where that plant has likely come from. So you can see these plants are able to be produced kind of a variety of different systems across a range of intensity, but only a couple of these systems we would consider forest farming. Something I want to just touch on, I'll make it quick here, is that forest farming is a production system for crops, but it can happen in a variety of environments, different forest environments, and can easily be tied to achieving restoration outcomes. So you'll often hear, you want a forest farm, and someone will tell you, well, look for your a beautiful site, a northeast facing forested slope with big, gorgeous, mature sugar maple trees and a bunch of indicator species. You might consider that your forest reserve. If you own some forest land, that might be your most beautiful, mature, intact forest site. And you can definitely forest farm there. And that's great. Plants are late, they tend to prefer kind of old growth conditions. And so that's a great environment to forest farm. Um, but forest farming is also compatible with some degree of actually of silviculture, of tree removal. And so if you're somebody who is interested in an overstory and an understory crop, you can forest farm alongside actually some degree of tree removal, silviculture, pairing silviculture and forest farming. And if you have a really degraded site, in the past, I think that technical assistance, we might have said that, well, you're out of luck. I think increasingly we're finding that you may need to do more interventions. You may need to clear those invasives. You may need to remove certain species, but you can forest farm in these environments too. So this is something that we're just advocating is that if you're willing to put in the effort and stay creative, you can forest farm in a lot of different environments. Um, and there's a lot of reasons to forest farm. One big one that we like to call attention to is this idea of achieving conservation through cultivation. And this is the idea that by forest farming and bringing forest farm plant material into supply chains, we're actually able to create an alternative to wild harvested herbs. The markets for understory plants, these medicinal markets, tend to be supplied primarily from wild plants. So forest farming creates an alternative opportunity. On top of that, you're introducing native plants onto your forest land. You're creating supplementary income. So forest farming is really a win-win. I first got introduced to forest farming in Appalachia, where there is decades of work that's happening there. I did AmeriCorps volunteering at an NGO called Rural Action in Ohio. And Rural Action was part of a larger initiative that started in 2015 called the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition. And that was started by John Munsell at Virginia Tech University, who I believe spoke at this conference or is speaking. And Essentially, John was able to bring together a bunch of different groups across the Appalachian region, nonprofits and small businesses that were forest farming and providing this kind of assistance, bring them together under this shared banner, and then use this collective group, this coalition, to advocate for funding, to push for policy. And so it was a very effective model of organizing. And so when I went to graduate school in the Northeast, uh, to get a master's in forestry, I was expecting to maybe find a similar level of organization around the practice, and there was very, very little happening in the Northeast. So uh, it's a long story, but I'll get to it. We wanted to get a sense of, well, are people just as interested in forest farming? And we began surveying forest landowners in the Northeast. And this is just a snapshot. When we asked people if they were forest farming, why, and if they were interested, why. And I'm not going to go through all these quotes, but you'll see that there's a wide range of interests. People in the Northeast region were coming to this practice with, various perspectives: income, wildlife, habitat, biodiversity, complementary to sugaring, protecting forests. So I think this is just a cool little like perspective on the motivations that people come to forest farming with. It truly is a kind of a broad coalition. And forest farming is a really good fit. This is also in our minds, when I was in school in the Northeast and had begun to work with some professors and, talking about forest farming and my background. Um, it's a great fit for the Northeast. Over 80% of New England is forested, and 80% of that is privately owned. And that's very high. But generally speaking, when you're talking about the Northeast US and the Midwest, and including, I believe, where you all are, it's privately owned forest land. That's definitely the bulk. And so when you want to achieve any kind of conservation outcome, you got to work with those private forest landowners. So, along with some faculty at the forest school at Yale, we decided to extend to sort of work with the Appalachian Forest Farmer Coalition and extend those services. And so we went shopping around for some funding and settled on a SARE grant. That's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And in 2021, had a proposal funded to create the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition. And our primary goal was to promote forest farming, in the Northeast region, provide some level of technical assistance and services. And the way that these SARE grants work, there's an emphasis on two main things: research and education. And so all of our programming has been based around those two things. The first thing we did was to set up a network of research and demonstration sites in the Northeast. And this is kind of just a visual overview of where those are and where we're talking about. We're pretty spread out, from up in northern New York into New Hampshire, and Vermont, Connecticut, down into Pennsylvania, and even as far as West Virginia. So it's a broad swath, you could say, of the Northeast. And our research sites on the ground, this is what they look like. So basically, we went to a university and nonprofit owned forest land, areas that we could access, and where we could also create these research sites and set them up for long term data collection, but also open them up for educational use as demonstration sites. And so you can see just a couple of different sites here. And I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but this is what we actually our research design for these sites. And so across 5 different sites, we planted them the exact same way. And the goal of that was to be able to collect data from all of those sites and be able to make comparisons. And so you can imagine, if you were looking down on the forest floor, um, this is what our sites look like, kind of from top to bottom, plant from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. So we planted 5 different understory species: ginseng, golden seal, bloodroot, ramps, black cohosh. And we planted all of those species by seed, and then we also transplanted in rootlets. And then we managed alternating rows of our plantings at a high and a low level of management intensity. And you could compare that to, in those production systems I was showing you earlier, wild simulated versus woods cultivated. And so our goals with this are to be able to make comparisons between management intensity, and planting stock type, seed versus root. And over time, go back, remeasure the sites, and be able to say, what the long-term success of our plantings looks like based on those different uh, planting approaches. So that's one big piece. The other big piece of what we do through the NFFC is education. And so I mentioned that uh, those research sites double as demonstration sites. Over on the far right there, that's my colleague Walker hosting an event at the Yale Myers Forest in Southern Connecticut. That's one of our research sites. So we're doing field-based education. We're working with aspiring and beginning forest farmers, some people that have been doing it for a while, also technical assistance providers like foresters and NRCS agents. We present at conferences, like I guess I'm doing right now. And then another a big piece of the way that we approach our educational work, and definitely the direction that we've moved more and more in the direction of over the past 3 years, is a more decentralized approach where we've identified now partner farms, who are forest farming and have been doing it for quite a while. They're now part of the coalition. We're actually able to support them in hosting workshops on their farms. And so in the top left, that's our partner, Anna Plattner of Wild Hudson Valley Farm, hosting an event there. And so we're able to support that work. And then forest farmers are learning from each other. And that is just a really effective part of the way that the coalition approach works. So I won't dwell on this for long. This is just kind of like our milestones by the numbers. It's been really neat to see. This started as a SARE grant, and this started as an idea to expand this kind of coalition model into a new region. And it's really grown into more of a body of work, and that's something that's been very rewarding. We've brought in now 3 or 4 grants. We've got a fourth that's pending to support this work. We've planted 6 different research and demonstration sites. We've got a coalition that now is almost 1,000 people strong. We've had a whole revolving door of master's students that have set up projects, through the sites, the research sites we've created. We're running a mentorship program that has over 50 participants, and so and working on peer-reviewed research. So it's been really cool to see that this is. It feels like it's grown pretty sustainably and organically, and that's a reflection of the interest. Um, so I want to quickly talk about some future work, future directions of our work in the Northeast, and um, kind of like the general direction that forest farming may be taking going forward. So we recently initiated a second SARE-funded project, and this project is focused on developing a regional planting stock economy. And so I mentioned that a lot of these plants are harvested from the wild. Forest farming is an alternative to producing understory plants. The trouble is, if you want to start forest farming, there's that first you need plants. You need to get plants. It's everybody's kind of one of their first challenges. And if those plants are just sourced from wild plant populations, you're just moving those plants, you're sort of undermining one of the big objectives that we have with forest farming. And so currently, if you're a forest farmer in the Northeast, really anywhere in the country, and you want to source plants, your options are to go to a handful of larger kind of industrial uh, facilities that produce like ginseng seed primarily. You can go to like a large national scale nursery like Prairie Moon Nursery, and you're able to find seeds there. It's relatively expensive, and traveling from it's really fairly large carbon footprint. Those seeds are traveling from out of the region, or you might be able to work with a handful of forest farmers that are larger scale that are in primarily the Appalachian region. But if you're a forest farmer in the Northeast, there's really no way you're going to find plants unless you manage to find a one-off connection. And so we wanted to change that with this project. And essentially, our goal here is to create a decentralized network of small scale nurseries that are producing seeds and roots of forest botanical species to distribute across the region. And the way we're doing that is by uh, essentially providing technical assistance and financial support to a small cohort between 5 to 10 people in the Northeast. And these are mostly active forest farmers, active seed savers, people that already have some significant kind of momentum in this direction. And we're going to work with them over the next 3 years to essentially build out populations of understory plants on their property to then be able to distribute. And so I don't have ton of time. Maybe if there's some questions, I could get more into our approach with this. But the goal is rather than like creating one large nursery for the Northeast, to actually support growers to grow these plants and then sell them to other growers and to have that be financially viable for everybody. Um, Now, in terms of just general momentum, uh, we're also seeing, we've been building out this coalition here in the Northeast. We're seeing just growing momentum across the country, and it's just something I wanted to kind of note. 10 years ago, they formed the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition. Before that, it was mostly grassroots, nonprofits that were doing assistance around forest farming. So what we're seeing is, also in the Pacific Northwest, and in other parts of the country, we're seeing this emerging support, regional support for forest farming. We're also seeing in this last year, and this was announced at Forest Farming Conference in Virginia a few months ago. There's the intention to create an American Forest Farming Association, and this would be a national level uh, organization. And if you're interested in learning more about this, you can go to the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition's website, and they've got a sort of a pull down tab on AFA. But this is to say that we're seeing major changes in the support for forest farming at a national and regional level recently. Um, and part of this is that there are a lot of different organizations that are getting into the game. You've got just more and more organizations that are taking up forest farming as a viable way to achieve conservation goals, as a viable way to achieve rural development, as a viable way to achieve cultural revitalization. And so it's an exciting time to be doing this work. And I know that there are some, my understanding is that there's some NRCS agents in the room. Um, and that's great because a big part of what we need here, and this is just kind of, you know, this isn't a comprehensive list. This is just my take, like as far as is, we've made great strides in providing forest farming assistance and getting people to take up the practice, but there's still quite a bit that we can do. And that technical assistance piece, what the kind of work that can be provided by foresters and NRCS agents, that there's a big need for that. And so this sort of knowledge sharing among uh, TSPs is huge. Um, other things here on this list, this is true, I think, really for all agroforestry practices. Definitely true for forest farming, but the need for, demonstration. That's a part of what we've been trying to do in the Northeast is just create, what does a forest farm look like? The top requested service when you survey people is they want, a site visit. They want to be able to see things, and it makes sense. I mean, that's how we learn, right? And so demonstration farms, huge. Nurseries, like I mentioned, access to planting stock. That's a huge need, and we're taking our approach in the Northeast, and we'll have more information soon on how well that's working. But kind of need all hands on deck with that. Policy, we always need more agroforestry friendly policy, and so there are folks that are working on that, and that's great. Communication, I mean, just the exchange of knowledge. I think we've made tremendous strides in this department, but there's always more you can do just to, something I'll plug if it hasn't been mentioned yet for everyone here in the room is to check out the Forest Farming YouTube channel. And I think that's a really effective form of organizing and communication, about what do these practices look like? Like, it's a great example of how you can use virtual tools to achieve things that weren't possible before. So um, market development, it's an ongoing challenge. Is making the sort of prices that people can get for forest farm products reflect the costs that go into forest farming versus wild harvesting. And as always, as with many environmental things, how do we value the sort of externalities? Forest farming achieves conservation outcomes, and I believe that that's something we should directly value so that we're supporting the people that are doing this work. So ongoing challenges there. And so I'll stop there, and I just kind of wanted to end on this idea um, of partnership between the NRCS, and I mentioned foresters as well, and forest farming. In thinking about how to expand the access to technical assistance for landowners, it seems to me that the NRCS, which does fund um, agroforestry, in every state, in forest farming in, I believe, 26 states, and we're working on getting the NRCS practice code for forest farming turned on in some additional places. But it seems that the NRCS is a perfect agency to be providing this type of assistance. And so we've worked quite a bit with NRCS in the Northeast, in different states up there, primarily in Connecticut, in Vermont. Um, but going forward, I think any opportunity we have to sort of forge relationships and connections between the NRCS and then the folks that are really working hard on forest farming uh, is great, and we should explore future partnerships there. Okay, and those are all my slides. Um, so I am happy if there's. I know that we could be a little over here on time, but happy to take any questions if there are any. Otherwise, that little QR code will take you to our website, and I'm happy to share my contact information too if anybody wants to follow up. And happy to be in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and have Q&A time just for a few minutes. We can take a couple questions.
Yeah, how were the demo and research sites selected, and were there any pre-existing operations or forest farming things going on there? Maybe I missed that.
Yeah. So the way we chose those sites was primarily, yeah, for the demonstration sites. I mentioned that they are primarily on university and nonprofit owned land. And so the idea there was, we wanted to make sure that we have lots of partnerships on working forest farms. But as for our research, since these are site or plots that we wanted to set up that we could potentially be taking data from for 10 plus years, the way we chose those was okay. Let's think about areas where there's access to forest land, where we know that that property is going to stay accessible and in a place that's actually open to the public. One issue for folks that are forest farming is like some people have different feelings about having a lot of people come through their woods, and know where their plants are, and there's some sort of security issues with that. So for those sites that I showed you, those replicated research sites, yeah, that's how that was part of how we made that decision. With this second project, uh, all of this cohort of beginning propagators who are going to be sort of our like small scale nurseries. That was an interview process where we basically put out an application, told sort of shared what we were looking for, folks that actually had some, experience and were really excited about taking on uh, small scale nursery production as part of their operation. And we're actually in the middle of conducting those interviews now. And so that's been a very back and forth kind of engaged process based on an application.
Hey, Karam, it's Badger.
Hey,
Couple
Badger.
questions. Hey, buddy. Um, One, a corn grower was telling me that he subsoiled his one of his fields and he like doubled his yield because I don't know, maybe some cations were more available to the corn roots. Do you see anybody doing anything like that? Obviously, it looks different on the side of the forested hill, all the tree roots. The other question is just real specific. Do you know any of these people if they're working with Ligusticum canadense, the boar hog root? Thank you.
I don't know of anybody working with boar hog. I'll start with that. Don't know about that, but I'll be curious if you have some experience or you're working with folks that are. And it's interesting, yeah, the subsoil approach. I mean, I would say no, and I think generally speaking, that's not something that we would like. When you start to get into tilling, I know of a few operations that are doing, are tilling in the woods, and I think it's like I wouldn't recommend it to a grower for multiple reasons. It's really hard to till through rocky, rooty soil, first off. And second off, you're doing so much to alter the soil structure and, the seed bank. You're making a lot of changes to that forest. And so from a sort of forest protection perspective, not ideal. But what we are seeing, and we are actually sort of working with folks to do, is instead sort of bringing in a soil medium. So like basically bringing in soil to sort of mound that up in a small area. Um, and this is primarily so like with this propagation proposal, like that's where we're actually working on some of these systems that take a different approach. Um, and we're doing that. We're working with folks to do that. The idea being, when you've got a looser soil medium, you're bringing in enriched soil. Maybe it's sort of like potting soil. It's an organic soil mix. You can work with different. We worked with someone in Vermont, a company that will make custom soil mixes, and had that done based on some specifications that Margaret Bloomquist at NC State helped us pull together. And we use that soil, mound it up to set up our research sites for the propagation project, where we're actually trying to grow out plants as fast as possible. And the idea, right, is the looser soil, you're going to get faster growth. You're going to get, some of the same benefits that I think probably you're describing with tilling soil, which is just like access to soil nutrition. And for sure, that results in faster plant growth. I think my recommendation would be, rather than tilling up your forest soil, if you can bring in, and I realize there's a cost to that, but if you can bring in some soil as an alternative and mound that up somewhere. We're experimenting with growing these plants along a forest edge, so like right as the forest meets the field, and doing that on a northern facing aspect. So you're getting like more light than you get in a forest, under a forest canopy, but you're not getting that direct light that can be damaging to these plants. And so, yeah, it's we're experimenting with these different types of production systems because it does depend on your goal, right? Like if you want to sell into the wild plant markets, then having plants that have grown in forest soil is often an advantage, through that compaction, especially with ginseng taking on kind of a wild characteristics. But if you want to grow plants to then subdivide and sell, grow a golden seal root that you want to subdivide into 4 root cuttings and sell as planting stock, then you want that plant to grow as fast as possible. And that's where changing the soil conditions, looser soil, more access to nutrition, makes a difference. So
Yes, thank you so much for joining us virtually today.